Coding or classifying field notes, observations, or interview transcripts by either inferring from the words being examined what is significant, or from the repeated use of words, phrases, whether a pattern is developing, i.e. that all activities which have been recorded are being understood in a similar way. Examining the aforesaid classifications to identify relationships between them, yet, concurrently beginning the process of understanding those relationships in general terms, so that they have credibility, CFPAR 5.8.3, p. 329, beyond the boundaries of the case being examined. Researchers draw upon previous knowledge about the world that has enabled them to distinguish between objects and between occurrences in their life. Making explicit these patterns, commonalities, and differences, in brief, making sense of the data, and taking these by now more developed theoretical constructs into the field to test or refine them. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 360. Elaborating a set of generalizations, which suggest that certain relationships hold firm in the setting being examined, and affirming that these cover all the known eventualities in the data set. Formalizing these theoretical constructs and making inferences from them to other cases in place and time. As we have seen so far from our discussion of qualitative data analysis, there are always variations in the number and description of steps for the same process by different authors. To the preceding body of knowledge, outlined by different authors, one can add the views of Waddling and James, 2012:385-395. According to these authors, the process of qualitative data analysis consists of 6 steps, namely: defining and identifying data. From the outset, it is crucial to obtain a clear understanding of the meaning of data, and fundamentally, even more importantly, the data required in accordance with the research question and aims. Collecting and storing data. When collecting data, most researchers start to form opinions and judgment, which result in theories being developed, in the mind of the researcher, and as such one has to consider not only ways to collect data, but also to store data to make them accessible for analysis. So the interviews, for instance, can be recorded by means of a digital recorder, transcribed and stored, loaded, on a computer program such as Atlas.titm version 6, Atlas.titm. Data reduction and sampling. During the data collection process, CFPAR 5.8.4, p. 330, reaching a point of saturation implies that all data were reduced, filtered, and sampled through the process of analysis. It is therefore critical for the researcher when analyzing data to determine what one already knows to be important or relevant, in accordance with the intended purpose of the investigation. Stated differently, the researcher needs to establish, on the one hand, which data are not relevant, and on the other hand, which data encapsulate the essence and evidence one wishes to focus on for a more detailed analysis. Hence, from the preceding can be inferred that it is important to establish incidences and similarities in the respective interviews. In addition, one should establish whether the expected reactions, responses, were obtained and if there are still deficiencies regarding certain questions. Structuring and coding data. Structuring and coding of data underpin the key research outcomes and can be used to shape the data to test, refine, or confirm established theory, apply theory to new circumstances or use it to generate a new theory or model, or even in the case of Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 361. This study, develop a new measurement instrument, such as a questionnaire, CFPAR 5.9.3, p. 339. During coding, the corpus of data has to be divided into segments and these segments are assigned codes which relate to analytic themes being developed, Fielding, 2002:163, and applied consistently over the period of analysis and over a range of data. Basic coding, carried out as a first step in the analysis of data, is both useful in itself and acts as a preparation of the data for more advanced analysis at higher levels of abstraction, Punch, 2011:175. It can therefore be deduced that structuring and coding signifies an analytical process of elaboration of data, as for instance obtained from semi-structured interviews in related themes, on the hands of codes and structures to form, establish, an understandable framework and associations derived from the language of participants. The process of coding for this study will be considered in a later paragraph, CFPAR 6.2.2.2, p. 370. Theory building and testing. An important purpose of research is to generate new knowledge, Waddling and James, 2012:392. To this end, it might be helpful to take into consideration the set of tactics for generating meaning from qualitative data, described by Miles and Huberman, 1994:245-246, commented on in an ensuing paragraph. More specifically in relation to theory building and testing as part of the process of data analysis, it can be said that based upon the created framework, relevant diversions, distractions, can be made and insight in the research question under investigation can be obtained. In building and testing theory, it is important to view the reactions of respondents and whether they correspond or not, and also to ensure that a point of saturation of data is reached. Reporting and writing up research. In brief, the reporting and writing up of research entails to put words on paper, in the form of a report, constructing an argument based on the findings of what you have done, what you have seen and heard, participants you interviewed and the information that comes forth from the process of data analysis. Ultimately, the conclusions drawn from the information should contribute to the body of knowledge and represent new meaning and insight in the research question. Cresswell, 2013:182-188, contrary to the view of Waddling and James, 2012:385-395, believes that the process of qualitative data analysis and interpretation can best be represented by a spiral image, a data analysis spiral, in which the researcher moves in analytic circles rather than using a fixed linear approach. One enters with data made up of text or images, e.g. photographs and videotapes, and exits with an account or a narrative. In between, the researcher touches on several facets of analysis, circling around and upwards towards completion of the process. Although the preceding belief of Cresswell may be true, he also offers a valuable research tip when Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 362. He in an earlier work urges researchers to look at qualitative data analysis as following steps from the specific to the general and as involving multiple levels of analysis, Cresswell, 2009:184-185. Stated differently, qualitative data analysis suggests a linear, hierarchical approach, building from the bottom to top, yet the approach is interactive in practice and steps are interrelated and always visited in a specific, prescribed, order. Synthesizing the discipline and rigor of qualitative analysis depends on presenting solid descriptive data in such a way that others reading the result can understand and draw their own interpretations. Implicated herein is the generation of meaning. Concerning the generation of meaning, Miles and Huberman, 1994:245-246, list the following useful general guidelines and tactics that researchers and others reading descriptive data should keep in mind. Noting patterns and trends. Do the trends, patterns, and conclusions make sense? Clustering. Grouping events, places, and people together if they appear to have similar patterns or characteristics. Making metaphors. Metaphors are rich, data-reducing, and pattern-making devices which help to connect data with theory. Counting. Helps to enable the researcher to see what is there by counting frequency of occurrence of recurrent events. Making contrasts and comparisons. Establishing similarities and differences between and within data sets. Partitioning variables. Splitting variables may be helpful to find more coherent descriptions and explanations. Subsumming particulars into the general. Linking specific data to general concepts and categories. Factoring. Attempting to discover the factors underlying the process under investigation. Noting relations between variables by using matrix displays and other methods to study interrelationships between different parts of the data. Finding intervening variables. Trying to establish the presence and effects of variables intervening between observed variables. Building a logical chain of evidence. Trying to understand trends and patterns through developing logical relationships. Making conceptual/theoretical coherence. In other words, moving from data to constructs to theories through analysis and categorization. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 363. The preceding paragraph set out to provide the theoretical framework and context for the data analysis of this particular study. In brief, as I have shown, qualitative data are in the form of text, and the act of analysis involves the examining of all elements of the data sets, to clarify concepts and constructs as well as the deconstruction of the textual data into manageable categories, patterns, themes, and relationships according to the research aims, CFPAR 1.3.2, p12. The researcher has at his/her disposal different methods for the analysis of qualitative data, and various steps, procedures, and processes are described by authors, experts and academics for qualitative data analysis. In addition to the preceding outline of the data analysis, CFPAR 6.2.1, p. 358, for this study the focus should now turn more specifically to the process of qualitative analysis. 6.2.1.1 Process of Data Analysis. Partington, 2003:113, states that there is little standardization with no absolutes where a specific type of qualitative data relates to a specific type of analysis. Newman, 2011:518, further opines that no single qualitative data analysis approach is widely accepted, while Schurink et al., 2011:403, posit that there are always variations in the number and description of steps for the same process of data analysis by different authors. From the preceding views, it can thus be inferred that each qualitative data analysis to some extent will be a uniquely designed event. With the preceding in mind, the qualitative data analysis of this research, responses from the semi-structured interviews, was done according to a qualitative content analysis process that integrated Cresswell's 2013:182-188, analytic spiral with the process as described by Marshall and Rossman, 1999:152-159, and Waddling and James, 2012:385-395, comments as offered by Gibbs, 2007 Volume 6, 1, and Cresswell, 2009:184-185, and recommendations by Henning et al., 2004:104-109, Roberts et al., 2006:43. Davies, 2007:181-184, Gall et al., 2007:257, Macmillan and Schumacher, 2010:322-323, 366-377, Grief, 2011:359, and Schurink et al., 2011:403-404. The qualitative content analysis involved the following procedures. Recording of data was done by audio recording on a digital voice recorder, while audio recording on another tape recorder served as backup of electronic failure and faults, and to ensure that all voices could be heard. Taking notes served as further backup and provided the context to the interviews. Verbatim transcription of the responses from the interview commenced as soon as possible, and was done by an expert to ensure a speedy completion. To ensure that the researcher became acquainted with the data for the purpose of analysis and interpretation, the original interview of the completed verbatim transcription was listened to again. Transcription notation. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 364. Symbols, comments, and the taking of field notes as suggested by Henninget al., 2004:76-77, were used to capture non-transcribable text to gain as much of the complete picture as possible. In an endeavor to ensure the reliability and validity of the data, CFPAR 5.8.3, p. 329, the verbatim transcribed interviews were presented to the respondents to verify and sign off. The entire transcribed text and field notes were thoroughly read at first to obtain an overall and comprehensive impression of the content and context before the abstraction process of coding began, where units of meaning are identified or labeled. Codes are names or labels assigned to specific units or segments of related meaning identified within the field notes and transcripts. Henning et al., 2004:104, Newman, 2011:510. The transcribed text was arranged in meaningful themes and categories with the assistance of Atlas.TITM version 6 according to codes. As progress was made with the analysis, further subthemes and subcategories were included to identify meaning connections, relationships, and trends. The coding process for the field notes and transcripts consisted of 3 steps described by Theotard, 2007:139, and Newman, 2011:510-514, namely, open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. Open coding involved the identification and naming of segments of meaning from the field notes and transcripts in relation to the research topic. The focus of open coding was on wording, phrasing, context, consistency, frequency, extensiveness and specificity of comments. Consequently, the segments of meaning from the field notes and transcripts were clearly marked, highlighted, and labeled in a descriptive manner. Axial coding was done by reviewing and examining the initial codes that were identified during the previous procedure outlined above. Categories and patterns were identified during this step and organized in terms of causality, context, and coherence. Selective coding as the third and final coding procedure involved selective scanning of all codes that were identified for comparison, contrast, and linkage to the research topic, question, as well as for a central theme or key linkage that might occur. The codes were eventually evaluated for relevance to the research aims, CFPAR 1.3.2, p12. Related codes were then listed in categories according to the research aims, CFPAR 1.3.2, p12, and theoretical framework from the literature study, CFPAR 4.9, p296, Fig 15, p289. From our discussion thus far, it follows that the analytic process was further informed by inquisitive questions to identify thematic relationships from the various categories, according to both the inductive and deductive reasoning process. Questions included amongst others, Henning et al., 2004:106. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 365. What was the relationship, S, in meaning between all the categories? What can be deduced from the categories as a whole? What meaning was missing? What was foregrounded in the analysis? What has moved to the background, in other words, what is no longer important or necessary? What alternative explanations were possible? How were the research aims addressed by the various categories? The qualitative analysis process for this research was concluded by the description of thematic relationships and patterns of relevance to the research. So, the thematic relationships and patterns identified during the interpretation process contributed towards the development of an appropriate instrument for the quantitative phase of this research, CFPAR 5.7.4.2, p. 325, PAR 5.7.4.3, p. 326. The process of qualitative analysis outlined above served as a framework to ensure that the initial data, semi-structured interviews, were systematized by thematic organization to form part of the data that were connected to and combined with the quantitative data, CF 5.7.4, p. 324. For clarity purposes and a better understanding of the qualitative analysis process for the current study, the qualitative content analysis process for the semi-structured interviews is illustrated in Figure 19. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 366. Figure 19, the qualitative content analysis process. The outlined process enabled a systematic and logic step-by-step approach for the analysis of the qualitative data and allowed the researcher to go beyond mere descriptive, comparative, and explanatory ends to discover the rationale and motivation for responses. Theotard, 2007:361. It is important to bear in mind that the qualitative process was approached like a spiral process and not as a fixed linear action. The content analysis outlined in the preceding paragraphs, and illustrated in Fig 19, CFP 366, often overlaps and implies that the various steps of analysis are regarded as mere procedural guidelines and not as rigid steps like that of a recipe. Schurink et al., 2011:403. In other words, although the content analysis process should be systematic and can be a logic step-by-step approach, it nevertheless should be adaptable to the specific needs and requirements of the researchers. The identified themes were further used as a basis for reasoning, argumentation, deliberation, contemplation, and the formulation of syntheses and conclusions to develop, in combination with the quantitative data, a sport management program for educator training in accordance with the diverse needs of South African schools. CFPAR 1.3.2, P12, Chap 7. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 367. To summarize, in relation to the current study, the qualitative data included the recorded responses from the semi-structured interviews, CFPAR 5.8.4.2, p. 332. The qualitative data analysis involved the deconstruction of the qualitative data into manageable categories, patterns, themes, and relationships in accordance with the research aims. Mouton, 2001:108, Newman, 2011:509-510. In accordance with the research aims, CFPAR 1.3.2, P12, the aim of the qualitative analysis of this research was to examine the various elements of the captured data to clarify concepts and to identify patterns, themes, and relationships. By means of organizing, reduction and the description of the data, the researcher attempted to interpret, make sense of, give meaning to school sport management and build theory to support the extensive literature review, cf. Chapter 2-4, in an endeavor to develop a measuring instrument, namely a questionnaire, CFPAR 5.7.4.2, p. 325, to determine the needs and competencies required by educators to manage school sport effectively in accordance with the diverse needs of South African schools. CFPAR 1.3. 2, P12, Research Aim 4. The methodology for the analysis of the qualitative data was based on the content analysis procedures, CFPAR 6.2.1, p. 358, and was presented in two sections according to the nature of the capturing data. At first, the focus turns to providing a discussion on the analysis gleaned from the semi-structured interview, which is followed by a discussion of the interpretation of the interviews and the analysis and interpretation of the quantitative part of the empirical investigation, namely the questionnaires. 6.2.2 Interview Analysis. Interviewing as data gathering method, CFPAR 5.8.4.1, p. 331, was included to obtain additional data, clarify vague statements, permit further exploration of research topics, expand on the qualitative findings and yield a more in-depth experiential account of the extent of school sport management and the views of school sport managers on the competencies and needs of school sport managers for educator training according to the research aims, CFPAR 1.3.2, P12. The recording of the interview data took place by means of note-taking and audio recording, CFPAR 6.2.1.1, p. 363. Verbatim transcripts of the interviews were compiled for analysis and interpretation. To ensure reliability and validity of data, the transcribed interviews were presented to respondents to verify and confirm the contents of the interviews, cf. Annex 0, on CD. However, only 2 respondents signed and returned the transcribed text, While all 6 respondents gave consent to the recording of the interview by means of a tape recorder and a backup recorder, cf. Anexurgi, on CD. In addition, the notes taken during these interviews served as another backup during the recording procedure. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 368. An experienced co-researcher was present at the first interview and provided academic assistance during this interview. The assistance involved amongst other things the guidance of the interview according to the research focus and asking clarification questions. The results of the decoding process were again submitted to the co-researcher for an independent evaluation. Regular discussions took place and adjustments were made according to suggestions and recommendations, CFPAR 5.8.3, p. 329. Before exploring the analysis of interview data according to the content analysis process utilized by this project, it is useful to discuss the utility of computer-aided research and the procedures followed using atlas.titm during thematic content analysis. 6.2.2.1 Utility of computer-aided research and procedures followed using atlas.titm. As mentioned earlier, this research leaned heavily on various new computer-aided designs and techniques for thematic content analysis. The use of atlas.titm, a program which has been used by many theorists in various fields including psychology, was adopted for this project. Sheridan and Storch, 2009:2, Zhang and Wildmuth, 2009:1-6, Atlas.ti, 2011, Fries, 2011:2, Alas.ti, 2012. The strength of computer-assisted thematic content analysis is that it automates various processes such as cataloging of primary documents, organizing of codes and code descriptions, and the use of memos which both leave a research audit, as well as aid in noting qualitative findings and moments of inspiration. Zhang and Wildmuth, 2009:6, Atlas.ti, 2011:3, Mentor etal, 2011:218. Also atlas.titm allows the researcher to organize and catalog all data in one comprehensive and efficient manner. Apart from the preceding strengths, atlas.titm also makes possible connections, relations, between codes, categories, and subcategories, as well as the creation of networks. Moreover, networks create the possibility to point out different relationships, similarities, and differences. Kelly, 2004:483, Liu and Schulman, 2008:105-107, Ryan, 2009:142-145. Baisley, 2010:453, also emphasizes the importance of atlas.titm when she states that atlas.titm manages research data effectively by arranging codes alphabetically, presenting strength of codes and depicting data graphically. As the themes were derived, atlas.titm was also useful in generating macro themes, which resulted in the final themes of analysis. Virtually every aspect of the content analytic process, including interpretation, was greatly aided by the use of atlas.titm. Various forms of outputs allow the researcher to examine specific aspects of the textual data. One can filter outputs using documents, quotations, memos, and supercodes. In this way, one is able to, for example, output Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 369. All quotations in a specific document that relate to a specific code. This process would involve significantly more time, were it done manually. Considering that not all hunches regarding code formations will be correct, computer-aided content analysis saves countless hours of fruitless work by providing data manipulation at the click of a mouse button. Atlas.titm allows codes to be dynamically linked to quotations and documents in a way that facilitates the quick and easy navigation of complex sets of data. Processes inherent in atlas.titm mean it fits well with qualitative content analysis as it allows formerly manual procedures to be accomplished more quickly, and establishes a definable audit trail. Sections of text is selected with the mouse and then either associated with an existing code, S, or used to define new ones. Also, using the program was a constant reminder of the systematic and procedural complexities necessary in order to produce a thematic content analysis of the quality required in the academic context. Although the interpretive phase still involved many hours of thought and interpretation, Atlas.TITM facilitated this process by keeping track not only of all the data in isolation, but also in reference to the overall context. The checking and rechecking of assumptions and conclusions is also greatly facilitated by the use of computer-aided analysis such as Atlas.TITM. In sum, concluding the discussion of computer-assisted thematic content analysis, more specifically in relation to the current study, use was made of a software program, namely Atlas.TITM version 6 for the analysis and interpretation of the semi-structured interviews. Here originates the building of theory, by making use of codes assigned to the most important aspects also applicable, relevant, to this research report. Moreover, the said Atlas.TITM program appears to be the exception on the rule on all other software programs, because it offers the user the opportunity to make all possible connections between the different codes of the qualitative database, Kelly, 2004:483. Equally important is the quick recall of data like an idea obtained from the networks created, which makes this program more than useful and valuable, Cresswell, 2008:249. In this regard, given the extent of the study and the purpose of the qualitative part of the report, the researcher made full use of the feature of Atlas.TITM to compile, provide, networks from the most important quotes connected with certain codes. As a result then of the connection, merger, of data obtained from the interviews, the researcher was able to develop a theoretical framework and gain insight for the development of a questionnaire, which will be presented in another part of this report, CFPAR 5.9, P 333, PAR 6.3, P 431. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 370. 6.2.2.2 Content Analysis Process. The analysis of the interview data was done according to the content analysis process as described in PAR 5.8, P 328, and 6.2.1.1, P 363. At first, all notes and transcripts were read to gain an overview of the body and context of the gathered data. The reading process was followed by a three-step coding process that consisted of open, axial, and elective coding procedures, CFPAR 6.2.1.1, p. 363, making use of the Atlas.TITM version 6 computer program. The open coding step led to the initial identification and marking of descriptive names for specific units or segments of meaning in relation to the research aims. These identified units of meaning to a large extent bore relation to and showed consistency with the questions that were asked during the interviews, cf. Annexure B, on CD. All these labeled units of meaning, as preliminary qualitative indicators, were again evaluated during the axial and selective coding steps for coherence and relevance to compile a final list of codes, CFPAR 6.2.1.1, P 363, Fig 20, P 374. Each category was systematically labeled in accordance with the relevance of the data and theoretical framework from the literature study, CFPAR 4.8, P 283, Fig 15, P 289. In Figure 20, CFP 374, a comprehensive framework that was compiled by means of Atlas.TITM version 6, and which contains all codes of interest to the research report, is presented. The framework in particular outlines and illustrates the main components, categories, of the data analysis done for the qualitative part of this study. The identified categories were: core competencies, functional competencies, specialist competencies, resources, training, governance, specialists, compulsory physical education, funds. Infrastructure. Support. The related units of meaning from the notes and transcripts were systematically assigned to the final categories. After a brief introduction of each of the main components, a discussion followed. Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 371. That includes verbatim responses, quotes, as examples where appropriate and applicable to enhance and substantiate views of respondents. Firstly, the discussion described the prevalence of prominent responses and continued with an evaluative and interpretive discussion in relation to the research aims. Given the extent of the current research, a brief account should be provided about the observation list. 6.2.2.3 Observation. Huberman and Miles, 2002:92,154, Henning et al., 2004:81-86, Theotard, 2007:184, and Coleman, 2012:254, recommend the use of an observation list during the interview process. A face-to-face interview enables the interviewer to observe visual clues, relating for example to the layout of an office, and also allows the observation of body language which might indicate comfort or discomfort, thus giving the interviewer clues on how to proceed. Over and above these advantages of observation, observation also can be helpful in the early stages of analysis in that it allows the interviewer to make a judgment about how signs are read and thus locate the data in the context in which they were collected. Scott and Usher, 2011:109,110. However, one should be careful not to derive too much in body language, because, as Trompenaars and Hampton, 1997, as well as Coleman, 2012:254, discreetly warn us, body language is not always easy to interpret, particularly so if people are from differing cultures. Turning the focus to the purpose of completing an observation list, it can be said for this report that the observation list was to provide a brief of the context of the source of data, background information of respondents' work environment, to build rapport with respondents, and to provide information about the setting and climate in which the interview took place. CFPAR 5.8.4.3, p. 332. No formal, structured, observation list was completed, because observation in the case of this study was essentially to obtain background information about the respondent which could serve as building rapport and a point of contact to conduct the interview, and to report on the cooperation to participate in the research. Cf. Annexure K, on CD. 6.2.2.4 Background information about participants in the semi-structured interview. All the education specialists, school, sport and academics from the Hayes were willing and helpful to participate in the research, and all the interviews were conducted in a friendly, cooperative manner. 5 of the respondents were male and 1 female. The one respondent was between 20 and 29 years old, 1 between 40 and 49 years and 4 between 50 and 59 years of age. Of the 6 respondents, 1 held a diploma, 1 boasted an honors degree, 1 a master's and 2 had Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 372. Obtained a doctorate. The work experience varied from 0-1 to 0-9 years, 2, 10 to 19 years, 1, and more than 30 years, 3. Some of the positive experiences of the interviewees were included in the analysis of the data. CFPAR 6.2.1.1, p. 363, 6.2.2, p. 367. Although the interviewees set aside time for the interview appointment, some interruptions did occur for them to attend to urgent school and academic matters. All interviews were however completed in full. The presentation and discussion of the semi-structured interview data follow in the next sections. 6.2.3 Presentation and discussion of the semi-structured interview data. The purpose of the semi-structured interview, as stated previously, CFPAR 1.3, p. 12, 6.2.1.1, p. 363, was to identify related themes during the interpretation process that would contribute towards the development of an appropriate instrument for the quantitative phase of this research. CFPAR 5.7.4.1, P325, 5.7.4.2, P325, 6.2.1, P358.91 from Fig 20, CFP.374, it can be readily observed that two themes in particular emanated from the analysis of the semi-structured interview, namely competencies and needs. This is also reflected in the research problem, namely to develop a sport management program for educator training in accordance with the diverse needs of South African schools, CFPAR 1.3.2, P12. 91 CF also, PAR 1.3.2, P12. Sport management competencies, as was already indicated elsewhere, CFPAR 1.2.1.5, P5, refers to the knowledge, skills, values, and individual characteristics in a specific context, school sport, subjacent to the management action of school sport applied to a defined standard of performance of a particular task, Bellis, 1997:8, Hollander, 2000:20, Gerber, 2009:12, Saucy, 2013:2. For purposes of this study, sport management competencies were earlier identified and described as core, functional, and specialist, PAR 3.6.9, P195, 4.8, P283, 4.9, P296, Table 18, P265. Needs, the second theme that emanated from the semi-structured interview, relate to those things that are necessary to stay alive, Bright et al., 2011:167. For the purpose of this study, needs would thus focus on those things, tangible and intangible, necessary to manage school sport effectively and efficiently. Having said that, one is also reminded that the school setting in the South African context is unique, and different schools from different socio-economic status, background, history, community, historically advantaged and historically disadvantaged, type of school, public or independent, secondary or primary, classification, combined, X Model C, Chapter 6, Data Analysis and Interpretation. 373. Technical, rural, agricultural, and township, number of learners participating in sport, composition of the school, boys or girls only and combined, cultures, ethnical origin, number of educators available to offer sport. All of these impact on the competencies and needs required by the school sport manager. The development of a sport management program for educator training should thus be a deliberate effort to ensure that the needs, demands, requirements, and competencies of educators are met. Kerr, 2003:2, O'Shea and Watson, 2007:53-54, Koetal, 2011:302, Very and Walsh, 2012:50-51. In short, program development is therefore a close, intimate, intertwinement between the needs of theory and practice and implies a good relationship between schools and Hayes which offer relevant programs for training. This twofold approach of school, community or practice, and Hayes can be seen as the focus of this research. Schools, in relation to the current study, should identify clear goals, objectives, time frames, training requirements, and competencies required for the management of school sport, while the interests and responsibilities of Hayes to meet the needs, demands, and requirements to schools to offer well-qualified, trained and competent educators are dealt with in an organized, systematic manner in accordance with a plan structure and long-term plan and goal. In Figure 21, CFP 375, the competencies identified from the responses of the interviewees are depicted. Responses assigned to this category represented the respondents' viewpoints and perceptions about the competencies required to manage school sport. As was stated elsewhere, in coherence with the literature overview, CFPAR 3.6.9, P195, Fig 12, P199, PAR 5.5, P319, Some of the responses implicitly indicated that the competencies required to manage school sport should include core, functional, and specialist competencies. Core competencies are those capabilities that are critical to a business achieving competitive advantage. Riley, 2012:2. Business Dictionary, 2013, takes a similar standpoint on their interpretation of core competencies, but add that in general, core competencies are the unique ability that a company acquires from its founders, or develops, and as such these core competencies cannot be easily imitated or replicated. Theoretically, a core competency should allow a company to expand into new end markets as well as provide a significant benefit to customers, according to an unknown author in Investopedia, 2013:10. In the context of the current study, the core competencies required to manage school sport should be seen as the central or innermost unique knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that are essential to manage school sport. Elsewhere, CFPAR 3.6.9, P 195, 4.8, P 283, 4.6.3.4, P 257, Table 18, P 265, reference was made that core competencies for the management of school sport can be divided into fundamental, foundational/essential, and general, basic day-to-day, management competencies.